The Addams Family Chronicles continue. Chapter 30, Friday's Child. He was born on a Friday morning, on an odd day in an odd year, in a little town called Clarksville, the second child of two young parents, still struggling through college in the late 1950s. There's nothing really odd about that, but as life progressed for him, fate would intervene in ways that can only be described as odd. Keith was very much in tune with the world around him, making him different from his siblings in many ways. He was capable of enjoying his time without the company of others, amusing himself with hobbies the others found uninteresting. Hobbies such as painting, guitar playing, making movies, candles, and glass cutting. He was a true child of nature, owning a capacity to care for dumb animals. Many of his pets were not those that typically come to mind, such as dogs and cats. He liked hamsters and sea monkeys, ant colonies and goldfish, and he cared for them selflessly and responsibly. He also had nervous mannerisms. He used to make a sound halfway between a grunt and a groan, as if clearing his throat, trying to unfreeze his vocal cords. Later on, he developed a head movement, as if to flip his bangs off his forehead, earning him the nickname Flip from one of the crueler kids. His peace-loving nature, however, opened him up to a fair amount of ridicule at the hands of those who saw his altruistic demeanor as a weakness, and as a result, may have contributed to his docile, non-confrontational manner. Keith was accident-prone. Throughout his childhood, he encountered many mishaps. It started rather early in his life. The first evidence came at the age of 5, when he sliced his leg to the bone while climbing in a peach tree. To hear Mom tell the story, you would think that he nearly bled to death. She recounts that, if not for her undergarment that she used to stop the bleeding and a subsequent rush to the hospital for 24 stitches to seal the wound, he might well have been just another leaf on the Addams family tree. But luckily, there was no infection, and the wound healed in a time when antibiotics were in their infancy. In his early adolescence, he found himself at the local swimming pool, enjoying the cool water on a summer afternoon. The pool was equipped with both a low and a high diving board. All of the Addams children were proficient swimmers, and they spent countless hours diving from the boards, performing flips and cannonballs at will, surely bringing terror to the watchful eye of their parents. On this day, however, Keith would not be so lucky. As he climbed the rungs of the ladder leading up to the high dive, he was followed by another teenager, arriving on the platform together, 15 feet above the concrete deck. Horseplay followed, and in the blink of an eye, he fell from the board, landing awkwardly on the edge of the pool. The sickening slap of skin and bone hitting concrete echoed throughout the pool area, sending adults racing to the child floundering in the deep end of the pool. What could have been a life-changing event only resulted in a cracked wrist and a very ugly bruise on his thigh. Destiny was again smiling on him. And then came high school. Keith worked at a local burger place called Burgerland. He was a cook there, and among his duties was that of peeling potatoes in an automatic potato peeler. It was an old machine, and it was given to freezing up when called on to peel a large potato. And that is exactly what happened. Keith had a potato stuck in the peeler. It was an easy thing to correct, as he had manually freed the potato many times by pushing the potato with his fingers. This time, however, the potato dislodged easily, and as the peeler came to life, he grabbed his middle finger, twisting and cracking it several times over. As he pulled his hand from the peeler, He was lucky to have his finger attached at all. He stood there, wondering how to approach his boss, Mr. Rowe, who was a stern man, ruling over his employees with an iron fist. After a while, with his hand behind him, he faced Mr. Rowe. I think I broke my finger. He stood there facing Mr. Rowe, intimidated in his presence. As he brought his hand out for him to see, Mr. Rowe's eyes opened wide, confirming the truth of his statement. He was taken to the hospital 40 miles away for surgery to fix the digit, and after a few years, it was as good as new. Luck was still running strong for him. But Keith's defining childhood moment came in December of 1973. It was a tempestuous time in the Adams household. Dad had been asked to resign his position as superintendent of the Waurika public school system. Mom and Dad were on the precipice of divorce after 20 years together. Such stresses can precipitate curious events in the life of a lovesick adolescent, and the opportune occasion for which Keith had been waiting was staring him squarely in the face. He had fantasized endlessly about reuniting with a girl from Florida, whom he had met while on a family vacation 2.5 years prior. The long distance that divided them, and the letters that passed between them, only served to nourish the fantasies, and to incite a criminal plan to fulfill them. In hindsight, he could have planned better. There was a call from the police in Wichita Falls to the Adams household. They had found an abandoned car in a parking lot, whose tags they had traced to the owners, Doris and Warren Adams. It was a 1962 green Chevy four-door sedan. Keith had driven it to work at Burgerland that day, but had not returned. All that was found in the car was a half-eaten burger and some very stale French fries. There was no sign of Keith, and fear of the worst-case scenario flittered through his mother's imagination. She pushed back the thought with a hard swallow as she and Dad drove silently towards Wichita Falls to retrieve the car, and they would travel back in solitude, each alone with their worry. But more bad news would follow. When the two cars drove into the driveway, 2 unsupervised children were there to greet them. Young Eric spied the half-eaten burger and the French fries, suddenly hungry at the sight of them. But after the first cold, limp French fry passed his lips, he decided that he wasn't really that hungry after all. Mom told the children that Keith was missing, but the news of his absence was as poorly understood by them as their parents' impending separation, and they went about their normal childhood endeavors with little concern. They hadn't been back home 10 minutes when the neighbor rang the doorbell. It was Jack Tripp, the local postman. He had a letter, but it wasn't in an envelope, nor had it been sent through the U.S. mail. It wasn't addressed to the Adams family. It was a note addressed to the second of his 3 daughters, Sharon, and it was penned by Keith. The text was long and sappy, with dark undertones, pleading for her affection and hinting at suicidal recourse. He had written it the day before and had left it in her locker at school. Jack Tripp was unaware of Keith's disappearance, and with Mom's uncharacteristic emotional reaction to the revelations the note brought, he now felt obligation to stay and offer support in any way that he could. The local police were notified, and a missing person report was filed. As a matter of course, it didn't take long before Mom and Dad's closest friends congregated at the house, along with the clergy from the United Methodist Church. The situation was about to get even worse. The doorbell rang again. It was the county sheriff. Mom and Dad were dumbstruck, caught between hope and despair, anticipating and dreading the news, frozen in the moment before the peace officer rendered the information that was brought to bear. Is he all right? Mom's voice was shaking, helpless in her unwavering optimism. "We received a complaint from one of the local merchants." The police officer was matter of fact, not unlike that of a doctor revealing a diagnosis of malignancy to one of his patients. "It seems that a money bag is missing from Burgerland. The owner thinks that maybe your son was involved. It is a sizable amount, which constitutes a felony in our state, about $1,300 in cash and checks. Until we find him and can talk with him, he remains our prime suspect." This news was met with numbing silence. One day passed, then two, with no clues about Keith's whereabouts. Dad resigned his job at the public school, and his departure was covered by regional television. In the segments, it was also reported that his son had gone missing, and one of the stations suggested that his son's disappearance might have contributed to his decision to step down. With rumors of social and criminal misconduct, the court of public opinion was casting verdicts, adding to the pressure the family was enduring. It was obvious that the family misfortunes had accelerated, and they found themselves at the zenith of uncertainty. And the nightly vigils continued. Then, on the third day, the phone rang. It was a phone call from a stranger in Miami, Florida. He introduced himself as Mr. Harris, a lawyer who, incidentally, was the father of Anna Marie Harris, the little girl whom Keith had met 2.5 years prior on their vacation to Florida. He explained that Keith had shown up there after spending 3 days on a bus, having bought a one-way ticket with the money he had stolen from the drive-in. He obviously had knowledge of what Keith had gone through and offered to handle any legalities associated with any charges that might be pending against him. He was taken with Keith's manners and complimented Mom and Dad on the job they had done in raising him. But the only thing that mattered to his parents was that Keith was safe and alive. The next day, Mom and Dad drove to the Dallas airport to retrieve Keith. It would be the last trip that they would take together, and they would separate 3 weeks later. The charges against Keith were dropped, subject to compensation for the lost money. No small task when considering that both parents were unemployed. It would take several years for Mom to satisfy that debt. Dad left and went to Tulsa. He would take a job as a janitor and a night watchman working for minimum wage. Later he would say that these were the darkest days of his life and that he missed his family terribly. But as the years went by, both Mom and Dad would find happiness in their lives and would be thankful for the children they had together. Keith would go on to experience even more oddities, and the theft of the money bag would not be the only scrape with the law he would endure. Yes, he was born in an odd year and on an odd day. But while the other 3 Adams children suffered broken marriages of their own, Keith would give Mom and Dad 60% of their grandchildren and remain steadfast in his marriage to the same loving woman. Time would prove that he was the least odd of any of the Adams children. Chapter 31. When you're hungry, eat your pride. 1974 was again a dark and stormy year in the Adams family household. A family that had taken 20 years to build was splintered by the fervent tempest of divorce. And when the dust had settled, an unemployed mother of 4 was left to gather up the debris of her broken life. The only life she had known since her graduation from high school and subsequent elopement from an isolated mountaintop in northwest Arkansas, where she was born and raised. That mountain refuge seemed so far away now, replaced by the burden and worry of raising a family alone. It was January, and it was as cold as Januaries get in southern Oklahoma. The relentless northwesterly winds, common to the winters in the flatlands of Oklahoma, howled through the small town, adding to the torment of the bleak winter. Mom sat dejectedly at her bedroom desk, staring at the checkbook. It read $64.21. Her eyes moved to the stack of bills that had multiplied in recent days. Water, electricity, gas, phone, credit cards, mortgage, all due at the end of the month. The mortgage alone was twice what she had in the bank, and she hadn't even bought groceries for the week. She pondered her employment options. She was a teacher by trade, well educated and experienced in both primary and secondary education levels. Her employment history, likewise, was exemplary, though she hadn't worked in 5 years. But in a small school system with a limited budget and a faculty of less than 20, midterm was not the ideal time for submitting resumes for consideration of gainful employment. The economy wasn't helping either. Unemployment, inflation, gasoline prices, they were all rising. So it would be a difficult proposition at best, even if she chose underemployment. She was always good with money, but there simply wasn't enough to make ends meet. She dropped her head into her hands as the realization crept over her, defiantly fighting the tears that welled in her troubled eyes. The children were dealing with problems of their own. Lynn was in his first year at a liberal arts college, adjusting to life away from home. Keith was keeping rather dubious company with a faster than average crowd, staying out too late, using his job at the local seafood restaurant as an alibi for his tardiness. Young Eric was on the doorstep of puberty, eager to walk through the threshold into the vestibule of sexual awareness, yet unwilling to close the door to his childhood. It was an impressionable era for him, a dangerous time to be without Priapian guidance. Alicia was barely 9, still naive, but keenly aware of how the family structure had been altered by the storm. They all longed for the insouciant days of the past, but together, Mom and the 3 youngest children would face the looming crisis as a unit, drawing strength and courage from the love they felt for one another. The end of the month was fast approaching, and the financial situation was becoming dire. Just how dire was evidenced by a letter that Mom had dispatched to her parents, asking for a loan. But it would be a week or 2 before she even received word. Had her parents had a phone, Mom would have called them. Asking her parents for money is something that she would never have done, as she was a very proud woman. But the dwindling inventory of food in the cupboards left her no other options. She had exhausted them all, including prayers for a miracle. It was Wednesday, the 30th of January. Mom had gotten the kids off to school and spent the day calling creditors and asking for extensions. She called the school too and reiterated her desire to teach again, hoping her persistence would be interpreted as enthusiasm rather than desperation, but was told that no decision had been made. Things had gone from hopeless to critical, and the stress was beginning to take its toll. She'd lost 10 pounds since this storm began, and it wasn't until the kids began filing home from school that she realized she hadn't even eaten this day either. The news, however, was just getting worse. Alicia was running a fever of 103 degrees. She had the flu. Eric had been in a fight with Jordan Fanning. He had a black eye. And Keith wasn't home yet. Who knew where he was? And just when Mom thought she could bear no more, there was a knock at the door. Young Eric ran to the door and opened it. Seconds later, a parade of people from the church flooded the family room, all carrying sacks and boxes full of groceries in their arms. It seemed as if there were enough food for an army. Young Eric ran excitedly to the food, reveling in the goodies contained within. Goodies not normally consumed in the Adams household. There were Pop-Tarts and frozen waffles, cake mixes and honey buns, canned deviled ham and potato sticks, all donated to the Adams family by the Good Samaritans of the congregation. Young Eric's excitement was evident as he pulled a box of Jell-O from one of the boxes. It was then that he noticed his mother, red-faced and uneasy in her acceptance of this charity. The ladies of the church seemed to have sensed it too, and they turned and walked out as swiftly as they had entered. Young Eric was full of ideas for supper as he rummaged through the sacks. Mom was thankful that one of her immediate burdens had been lifted, at least for the short term. The food seemed to make things better, that is, until she began to ruminate on the question of how the bills would be paid. Again, the dark clouds began to swirl about her, and the 62-degree thermostat-controlled chill of the house began to sink in around them. It was only a temporary fix, and Mom was more fearful than ever about the future of the family. And then, another knock on the door echoed through the dimly lit house. Mom rose from her family room seat, followed closely by an inquisitive young Eric in her wake. It was nearly dark as she opened the door, revealing the silhouettes of two men in trench coats, wearing gloves and scarves to ward off the cold. Mom's silence provoked one of the men to begin talking. "Mrs. Adams, we're here on behalf of the Masons. As you know, your husband is a 32nd degree Mason, and it is our duty as Masons to take care of wives and children of our fellow Masons. Please accept this gift in the spirit with which it is given." One of the men handed her an envelope and bade them good night. The two of them closed the door and walked back into the family room together. "Who were those men, Mom?" Eric's question was not immediately answered. She fumbled with the envelope and opened the flap, revealing a thick wad of U.S. bills. As she brought them into open view, there was a silence between them. Eric looked at his mother discerningly, and as she held the wad of money in her hands, she began to cry. It was slow at first, but with each breath she took, she wept louder and less ashamedly. "Oh, what good people!" She repeated it again and again, saying nothing else, thankful for the gift, while lost in the shame of its necessity. Eric only watched, as he had never before seen his proud mother so overcome with emotion. The mortgage was paid 2 days later with the money they were given. The school called too, with a job offer for a position that had been vacated by a teacher that had suddenly decided to move to Tulsa. And yes, Granddad and Grandmommy came through with a loan, and the Adams family remained solvent until they got back on their feet again. Maybe it was the prayers for a miracle that got them through. No one can say for sure. But during that stormy winter in 1974, a lot was learned about perseverance, but a lot more was gained from having endured.